Hi, I'm Steve Ruth, a professor in the School of Public Policy at George Mason, and this is the second lecture in this two-lecture series for the first few weeks of the course. And in it, now that I've discussed some of the issues in the course, some of the basic overriding, you might say, policy superordinate issues, now I want to get into some of the specifics that we'll be examining and also bring up some of the very sensitive issues that are part of this discussion. The first one I'm calling interventions and key options, but I'll try to give you, in just a minute or two, a description of some of the kinds of approaches we're going to be looking at, some of the options that may possibly help in reducing drastically the cost of higher education, which, by the way, would also drastically change some of the ways that government approaches higher education. One of the options is normal versus blended versus completely online learning. The normal approach we've been doing it's probably been going on for thousands of years, and that's the professor or the teacher and the class around that teacher. Blended learning is a combination of what we're doing right now, for example, online learning and the normal approach. And completely online, which is becoming more and more in vogue these days. Each one of them is a different intervention, a different approach, and something that has to be examined closely. Measuring cost increases in tuition, etc., is another part of what we're going to be looking at in terms of interventions and key options. Room and board, books, facilities, you might say, well, it has nothing to do with what we're discussing here, but it's all part of the tuition package cost. And what we're going to be looking at is when tuition increases, which components seem to increase most. And as you'll find, I can just give you the bottom line. The biggest component of tuition is labor costs, particularly of faculty and administrators. And we'll be looking at those, of course, but we'll definitely be looking at many of the other options that have cost options in it. And then we'll be looking at solutions. What are some of the possible solutions? Well, I mentioned course redesign. There's a group called the National Center for Academic Transformation, which claims to be able to reduce costs by as much as $5 or $10 billion a year. You might say, well, that's not very much in the education budget, but that's how much those costs are going up every year. So if we could have a reduction instead of an increase, that would be pretty substantial. Another approach is what free MOOCs, that's massive open online courses, for free. Almost all of them are now. There's thousands of them, and they're all free. But eventually they're not going to be free because they'll be offered for credit, so that's another option, the for-credit MOOCs. Another one is the $1,000 degree, which Bill Gates has talked about. Although he's very conscious of the fact that employers don't recognize that kind of learning yet, competency-based learning, that he feels that there's no reason why a college experience should cost any more than, say, a couple of $1,000 instead of 100 times that, or certainly 50 times that. So that is a very interesting issue that we're going to be examining. The $10,000 degree program, the Governor Perry suggested the Texas legislature aim for, and they actually have a couple of them going on in that state right now. The for-profit degree programs, we'll be looking at those. They've been taking a lot of hits lately in terms of the press, but they're certainly a significant factor. And the not-for-profit, which is like George Mason University, for example, this course is a not-for-profit university course that's being offered. And there are a lot of different ones. And finally, the one that I hope you'll find the most intriguing is the one I wrote that paper about, called the export-import model, and that basically is the model that says if we've got a course that in astronomy, for example, at George Mason, that's better than any other astronomy course, why can't we export it all over the college world, not just in the United States and beyond, and claim credit for it and also get revenues for it, and let students receive their normal registration and also get course credit. So those are some of the key options and interventions. And we'll be discussing in the class some of the sensitive issues in this debate also. Obviously, there are quite a few of them. One of them is promotion and tenure. only about 1/3 of the professors in colleges today are on tenure or tenure track. It used to be that there were 70% of them were. So they're entirely different. Most of the students are now being taught by professors who have other than tenure or tenure track, very expensive employment agreement. That's going to certainly come up. Class size is another one. The first MOOCs in 2011, 2012, the really big ones, the ones at Stanford, were attracted as many as 300,000 students, of which 50,000, the course that Sebastian Thrun taught in artificial intelligence, 50,000 students finally completed that course. Only a few hundred Stanford students actually got credit for it, but a few students in Europe also got credit. So anyway, the class size is beginning to be a variable of considerable importance. How significant is it to be face-to-face in contact with the professor? Many people feel that if you don't take a class where you're with the professor the entire time, if you take a class that's other than that, that you're not really taking a legitimate college course. So we'll have to look at that. Although I can tell you that well over 1/3 of all the students in college today in the United States are taking at least one course, one credit course online. So that's certainly an interesting issue, and we'll look at it. The status of adjunct faculty enters into this quite a bit. The community college workload. Community college, a very significant amount of education goes on at community colleges, and they are very, very big users of online methods, various online teaching interventions. And interestingly, the for-profit, if you want to take a community college 2-year degree for-profit, with a for-profit, the cost can be as much as 5 or 6 times as much as the cost of going to your local community college. So that's a very interesting issue that comes up. Another one that we certainly can't ignore is the construction issue, because if 1/3 of the students are taking courses now online, 1/3 of the students taking at least one course online, one would think that the construction costs would be going down, but in fact they're going up 10% a year, more than 10% a year. So that's an interesting issue. Do you still need all that brick and mortar when the overwhelming, this past year, for example, 10% of the increase in online learning was 10%, only 10%. That's the lowest it's ever been, but that's a very, very large increase. So that tends to be a non-construction related issue, and yet there's massive construction going on in colleges, about 11% in last year increase over the previous year. Not-for-profit versus for-profit, we'll be talking quite a bit about that. And when we get to discussing MOOCs, we'll be looking at format, learning management systems, feedback approaches, how do people get back to the professors with their questions, classification as to appropriateness. Are hard sciences courses better for the MOOC approach than soft sciences? Quantitative versus qualitative. If a course is about economics or sociology, let's say sociology, for example, is that a little bit tougher to do online than, say, artificial intelligence or computer science? How do you do the exams? Do you need texts when there's so many online materials? Security, how is course security maintained? And what about remuneration? Should that professor whose course is extremely popular and which is exported all over, should that professor be gaining significant benefits over her or his colleague who doesn't have the courses exported? Those are all interesting issues. And of course the overriding issue that goes with it that I've mentioned several times is the one that Bill Gates has brought up, questioning the role of the university as a place, not dismissing the idea of the university being a physical location, but simply saying that there's more to it than that now, and it's possible that as a center for learning, a university is far more than a place, but you might say it's a hub in the context of a computer hub. So those are all some of the issues that we'll be examining and coming across. And finally, in this presentation, I want to talk about the portfolios, how those portfolios are going to work. Each student, well, I haven't quite figured it out yet because the course hasn't started. I'm dictating this before the course starts. But each student will probably have 2 or 3 portfolio items each half of the semester, and those are things that they'll specialize in. You can pick it. You can pick the portfolio of your choice, and then you'll spend more time looking at that than you do at some of the other things we'll be looking at in class. I've been using this portfolio approach for a long time, and it seems to be very successful with students. So these are some of the portfolio topics, and you can see them up there also in the slides. First one is, what makes an online student successful? What do we know about some students better than others in the online environment? Another one is the one I mentioned earlier, the higher education value proposition. Is it still a really good deal to have a college degree? I know the answer is yes, but to what degree is that changing, or is there any difference between the college degree and its value that's obtained online versus the one that is obtained in the normal way? The export-import model, that's what I wrote the paper about, and some of you may find that an interesting issue to look at. If it ever happened that we had the export-import model in place, there would be a drastic difference in the role of faculty, the significance of education, and certainly in the financial issues associated with universities, particularly large public universities and their funding. For-profit versus not-for-profit, that's an interesting issue that a lot of people like to look at in terms of portfolio development. And in terms of MOOCs, here's another topic that may be interesting for your portfolio choice, is what are the top 10 MOOCs? I'm going to give you access to vast numbers of them, and you'll be looking at a few, maybe even taking a few if you wish. But what do you think are the best ones? My favorite one is the data course given by the head of the Stanford Computer Science Department, Professor Wickham. Her course is absolutely wonderful, and I'll give you access to that. In fact, it's on the syllabus. So another one of these portfolio items is picking your MOOCs. And I'll just give you 3 more here. One of them is research approaches to evaluate distance learning. There is a vast literature out there, and a very legitimate database literature on distance learning approaches, and I'll link you to that literature, and some of you may, for your portfolio, want to look into that, what they're finding, what sort of issues they're exploring, and what you feel is the bottom line. There's a study that's done every year. It's a very significant study. It's done by Babson University, and it actually interviews 2,500 academic administrators, gets their views on particularly on distance learning and the role of distance learning, and now the role of MOOCs. And the latest one of those is out. I'm making it part of the course package, and you may want to spend some time on that one as part of your portfolio. Globalization in distance learning. We're not the largest distance learning user by far. China is, and you may want to find out more about how distance learning is applied in other countries. And there's also one I have here called Distance Learning Statistics. It may be that you'll find yourself interested in going into any of those. So the portfolio is basically a couple of areas each semester, each 7 or 8 weeks of the course, the first and the second, that you find yourself interested in to the point where you spend more time with those, and then you develop a little portfolio description when it's all over. So what I discussed in this second lecture is a little bit more of the specifics of the course and some of the key bottom line issues, and also some of the hot issues in the future, and also the ones that you may want to select. So I hope this is a good beginning. It's, I hope, short enough and interesting enough as I get used to this technique myself, so that we can take full advantage of the material, and most importantly of your own interests as we proceed through the course. Thanks a lot.